Narcissism is a complex psychological phenomenon that goes far beyond mere self-love or apparent arrogance. Its roots run deep within the structure of personality, embedded in how the ego is formed, defended, and how it maintains the illusion of self-worth. In its clinical form, narcissism is recognized as narcissistic personality disorder, a condition marked by a grandiose sense of self-importance, a constant need for admiration, a lack of empathy, and a tendency to use others as tools for self-validation. However, it's crucial to understand that narcissism doesn't exist only as a disorder. It appears on a spectrum, from healthy self-confidence through self-centered behavior, all the way to destructive forms of control and emotional manipulation. Pathological narcissism often develops as a result of deep emotional trauma in childhood. Children who were ignored, overly controlled, idealized, or emotionally abused often develop narcissistic defense mechanisms as a means of psychological survival. Their true self remains buried, while an idealized mask is built, a false persona that acts as a shield against pain, shame, and the feeling of being unworthy. Neurologically, research shows that individuals with pronounced narcissistic traits often display reduced activity in brain regions responsible for empathy and emotional resonance. Functional MRI scans reveal decreased activation in the anterior insula and anterior cingulate cortex, areas tied to understanding and mirroring others' emotions. At the same time, their dopamine systems are hyperactive, meaning the narcissistic personality functions as if addicted to external validation, attention, power, control, and affirmation. This is similar to the pattern seen in substance addiction. The brain becomes wired to reward attention, making it increasingly difficult for the person to feel fulfilled without constant stimulation from the outside world. Medical studies in neuroscience have further confirmed that individuals with narcissistic traits often exhibit abnormalities in the prefrontal cortex, particularly the medial prefrontal region, which is involved in self-referential thinking, decision-making, and moral judgment. In addition, structural brain imaging, using volumetric MRI, has shown that the gray matter volume in the anterior insula, a region closely associated with emotional awareness and empathy, is significantly reduced in individuals with narcissistic personality disorder. This biological basis supports the idea that their limited empathy is not just a behavioral choice, but may be rooted in neuroanatomical differences. Neurochemical imbalances also play a role. The dysregulation of oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, has been observed in those with narcissistic and antisocial traits. Oxytocin is crucial for attachment, trust, and social bonding. Low levels may contribute to an inability to form deep emotional connections. Simultaneously, cortisol levels, the primary stress hormone, tend to be elevated, suggesting that many narcissists live in a chronic state of inner tension, masked by external bravado. This constant internal stress can affect cardiovascular health, immune system response, and sleep regulation, meaning the consequences of narcissistic coping mechanisms aren't just emotional, but systemic. But this internal mechanism is fragile and unstable. Behind the self-promotion and grandiosity usually lies deep insecurity and fear of being exposed. Such a person doesn't know who they are without the role they play, without an audience applauding, or a partner who reflects their idealized image back to them. This false self, or ego construct, is like scaffolding built around a hollow space. It's elaborate, attention-seeking, but emotionally disconnected. It's not that the narcissist doesn't have emotions, they do, but those emotions are often filtered through the lens of self-image preservation. Any threat to their constructed identity triggers defense mechanisms such as denial, projection, rage, or dissociation. Narcissism is, at its core, an extreme identification with the ego, a mental construct that desperately tries to maintain a certain self-image at all costs. From a psychoanalytic perspective, the narcissistic personality is not connected to its authentic self, but to an illusion of what it wishes to be, an idealized projection. Jung called this process ego inflation. The ego, when not grounded in real experience and introspective awareness, begins to expand, to dominate over the inner voice of the soul, and to reject anything that threatens its image. The result is a person who cannot tolerate criticism, equality, or form genuine, balanced relationships. The ego itself is not inherently negative. In fact, it serves essential functions in early human development, helping to form identity, boundaries, and basic decision-making. But when the ego becomes the sole navigator of one's inner world, it loses its function as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious, and instead becomes a tyrant that suppresses deeper wisdom, spiritual connection, and vulnerability. Narcissism is what happens when the ego breaks free from integration with the self and acts as if it is the totality of the person. In this sense, narcissism is not just a psychological issue, it is an ontological crisis, a breakdown in the alignment between the soul and the persona. Jung believed that such a person has not undergone individuation, the process of developing the self by integrating the shadow, the inner child, and the archetypal forces of the unconscious. Instead, the narcissistic individual remains frozen in a stage where identity depends entirely on how others see them, on opinions, and on external forms of power. In that sense, narcissism is a spiritual fracture. When a person becomes fully identified with the ego, they lose contact with the higher aspects of their being, with intuition, compassion, an authentic identity, and inner peace. Narcissistic energy does not arise from within. It is vampiric. It feeds on the attention and reactions of others. The narcissist cannot bear solitude because in silence there is no one left to reflect their existence back to them. This leads to impulsive behavior, emotional instability, manipulation, and dependence on the outer world. In relationships, narcissists operate through patterns of idealization and devaluation. At first, the partner is showered with attention, compliments, and a false sense of being the one. But as the illusion begins to fade, the narcissist becomes cold, critical, demanding, and often cruel. The partner finds themselves trapped in a cycle, unable to understand how they went from being idealized to emotionally abused. Narcissistic manipulations include gaslighting, emotional withdrawal, shifting blame, and guilt projection. All of it serves to preserve the narcissist's illusion of superiority and avoid facing their own vulnerability. This pattern is especially damaging in close relationships and family systems. Children of narcissistic parents often grow up with deeply fractured identities, learning to suppress their own needs and emotions in order to avoid rejection or conflict. These children either become overly compliant, losing their sense of self, or they may adopt narcissistic traits themselves in order to survive. Long-term exposure to narcissistic abuse can lead to complex PTSD, anxiety disorders, and a chronic sense of worthlessness. It's not just psychological, it becomes biological. The stress hormones activated in such environments cause measurable changes in brain chemistry, memory, and immune response. In fact, trauma from narcissistic abuse has been shown to reduce hippocampal volume, impacting memory processing, and alter amygdala function, heightening fear responses and emotional reactivity. This neurological reshaping means that victims may continue experiencing the effects long after the relationship ends, unless addressed through proper therapeutic methods. Techniques like trauma-informed therapy, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and somatic experiencing have shown clinical effectiveness in helping survivors reconnect with their nervous system and rebuild a coherent sense of self. At the root of it all lies a wound. Narcissism is not strength. It is protection. Behind the mask is a child who was never truly seen, who learned that love must be earned by pleasing others or playing a role. That inner child doesn't know how to love because they were never loved unconditionally. Healing narcissism is not a straightforward process. It cannot be achieved by force or surface-level interventions. It requires a deep inner shift, a deflation of the ego, an honest encounter with the self, and a conscious integration of the shadow. Jung believed that all healing begins when a person looks into what they've rejected, into their own weakness, shame, aggression, grief, and helplessness. From that confrontation, authenticity is born. Through the acceptance of imperfection, the process of individuation begins, a return to the self, the building of a stable inner identity that does not depend on the outside world. From a spiritual perspective, narcissism is a call to awaken. It signals that a person is too disconnected from the source, from truth, from the consciousness that knows love, does not require validation. When the ego no longer leads and the heart opens, narcissistic patterns begin to dissolve, not through resistance, but through understanding. Narcissism is not transformed through moral judgment, but through compassion. That doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior. It means recognizing that all destruction comes from a wound that was never healed. Spiritual traditions across the world speak of ego dissolution as a necessary step toward enlightenment. In Buddhist terms, narcissism can be seen as attachment to form, illusion, and identity, an over-identification with the self that must be transcended. In Vedanta, the ego, ahamkara, is considered a false sense of self that veils the true self, Atman, which is eternal and unchanging. In Christian mysticism, pride, the root of narcissism, is seen as the original spiritual fall from grace. In all cases, the way back is the same: humility, self-inquiry, surrender, and inner transformation. In a society dominated by superficiality, competition, and image, narcissism becomes almost epidemic. The collective psyche is saturated with ideals of success, beauty, control, and perfection, while authenticity, introspection, and inner development are neglected. In such a world, narcissistic patterns don't just survive, they are rewarded. That's why understanding narcissism is important not only for individuals dealing with narcissistic partners, parents, or colleagues, but for society as a whole. Transformation begins with the individual, but its impact is collective. When people learn to recognize narcissism, to set boundaries, and to build their identity independently of external validation, they create a new energetic space. A space where perfection is no longer the goal, but presence. Where we no longer seek power over others, but connection with ourselves. Narcissism teaches us, through pain, how important it is to return to who we truly are. And that real strength is not found in control, but in the ability to be vulnerable, honest, and free. Please share, like, and subscribe to our channel.